Hello everyone, Trophy Wine Hunter. Today I'd like to do a video on the region of Chianti. So Chianti is a very popular type of Italian wine. I think it's popular because it's fruity, it's bold in nature, it's very easy to enjoy, it's got high acidity, high alcohol content. It really goes well with food, particularly anything to do with tomato sauce, pizza, pasta, and meats. So just from a basic perspective, Chianti is a wine region in Tuscany, and that's located in the central part of Italy. So the city that's most associated with Tuscany is Florence. And because it's an old world wine, you would expect that on the label, it doesn't tell you what the grape varietals are. So it won't say on there, as an example, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. It won't say that. It'll just say Chianti, and you're expected to know that in the Chianti region, they produce a certain type of grape. And generally speaking, in the Chianti region, they produce red wines, and most red wines are predominantly produced with the Sangiovese grape. In the 1870s, they did some research, and actually a Baron Bettino Ricasoli narrowed down the formula for Chianti wines to three Tuscan grape varietals: Sangiovese, Cannanolo, which is still used today in the blend, and Malvasia. The Chianti region was producing very good wines all through the 1800s and 1900s, but then what happened is it got too successful, and what happened is the original zone, which is kind of Chianti Classico, got expanded. And that's because I think, people are successful, you want to create more. So they expanded that. And then in 1967, the formula that Baron Ricasoli had was kind of expanded too, so that up to 30% of the blend in Sangiovese in a Chianti wine could be white grape varietals. And it must have been for a number of reasons, maybe for taste, but mostly for mass marketing, so that they could produce more. And that really hurt the Chianti region. There was a lot of people that Italy was being industrialized, and so a lot of people didn't want to work in this type of industry, the agricultural industry. They wanted to work in business, and so in order to stimulate people to go into those markets, they had to have more incentives, and the people that were going into this market were doing more mass production, more interested in the money part of it than the kind of the love of it. And so that, in a way, you can say for the Italian economy was great. It produced a lot of Chianti wines, and they're still produced in a huge proportion. Having said that, probably the quality went down, and they got this reputation of having these cheap wines. So if you remember, if you're a little bit older, in the 70s or 80s, these wines in these straw baskets, generally speaking, those would be Chianti. And it was kind of nice because, we didn't at that time travel as much. So, having something like an Italian wine was quite exotic. It's like, wow, this is great. And we have to have this historical context. Nowadays, we can hop on a flight. You can see all the types of things on YouTube and on your television. There's all types of ways to, get access to Italian-speaking people. Italians come visit. You can Zoom them. That in the 1970s was not that, or even in the 60s or 70s, was not that popular. Go to Europe was a big thing and a big trip. Traveling was a big trip. And, same thing. Drinking an Italian wine. Wow, that is, you're pretty high end. So it was a big thing at those days. And even a $10 wine, if you look at inflation today, a $10 wine in 1960 is probably, equivalent with inflation to $50 or $60 wine. So it's a totally different context. And I think it's really important to remember that when we look at wines, the historical context. For many years, Chianti was treated like a very value wine. Great wine, for the masses. Everyone loved it, but they started to improve in quality. And with Robert Parker and all this stuff about wine appreciation and wine education, this is a very, very new thing. Probably you're talking 1990s or 2000. Before that, it was just people just drinking regular wines. And there's none of this taking courses and doing this high-end wines and going all around the world to travel to vineyards. None of that happened, not in a very large scale. So in 1984, Chianti and Chianti Classico were upgraded to a DOCG classification or region. And so the formula was adjusted so that only 2% of white grape varietals could be used, and many other grape varietals could be used in the blend. And I'm not sure exactly why they used white grape varietals. Probably at that time they thought it would taste better, or maybe it was more accessible, but that probably wasn't the greatest idea in the world. In 1996, they eliminated white wine grapes at all in the blend and allowed up to 15% foreign varieties like Cabernet, Sauvignon, and Merlot, which I think is still fairly unusual to use in a blend for Chianti. You don't see that very much. Just to tell you how big Chianti is in the marketplace, the largest, actually most of it is exported. So a third of all Chianti produced is exported to the US. And then only 20% Chianti stays within Italy. UK and Canada also, about 10% of the Chianti is exported there. So it's a huge export market. And I think probably one of the most popular styles of Italian wines in America. Let's talk about the different types of Chianti. So at the most basic level, it's called Annata. So these are just simple wines. They can come from anywhere in the Chianti region. Remember I talked about when they expanded the region, there was a Chianti, kind of a central location, or Chianti Classico, and then they expanded it. And so Chianti, those wines are mostly mass-produced wines, very affordable, probably in the $10 to $20 range. Easy drinking, so it's very tart. I guess it could go well with food if you're just having a good time. Italian food, that's great. Not particularly my type of wine, but because they're really high alcohol, they're quite affordable and quite fun wines, quite frankly, if you want like high alcohol. Then you go to Chianti Classico wines. And Chianti Classico wines come from a distinct region. They come from the region between Siena and Florence. And you'll see on them, for instance, I have this one, the Chianti Classico wine from Castellana. You'll see on the back of this rooster. You'll see the rooster on all Chianti Classico wines, like Volpaia. You'll see it here. So there's a very good story behind this. So legend has it that so there was two republics in those days, the Republic of Siena and the Republic of Florence, and they were going to war for many hundreds of years, and they decided to settle, and they said, well, let's do the borders. Now, this could be legend. I don't know if it's actually true, but they kind of decided, okay, the best thing to do is we're going to have some roosters wake up at dawn, and then once the rooster crows, the knight from Siena and the knight from Florence will travel on horseback, and then wherever they meet, that's where the border is going to be. So the Sienese chose a white rooster, and they really fed it, and they made it feel like a real royalty and treated it like tenderly and stuff like that. The Florence people decided to choose a black rooster, and they starved it and they put it in a really small cage. So what happened on the day of this contest is, because the black rooster was starving and basically very uncomfortable, he or she started to crow way before dawn, and that gave a huge head start to the knight from Florence, and ended up that the border was only a few kilometers outside of Siena, because he had like an hour, a couple of hours of head start. Now, I don't know if that's true. It's a great story. Who knows? But that's why they have this rooster. And it's a celebrated symbol of Chianti. So you'll see that on all Chianti Classico wines. And they, in their mind, think that that's the original place where Chianti was grown, so it should be better. Is that, it's a generalization. Is that all true in all cases? Not really, but you'll generally see Chianti Classico wines more expensive than regular Chianti wines. So wines that are aged more than a year can call themselves Chianti Superior, but that cannot apply. So Chianti Classico wines that are aged more than a year, they can't call themselves superior. It doesn't. There's two different rules for Chianti and Chianti Classico wines, right? So yeah, so a 1-year-old wine outside of Chianti Classico can call itself superior. If it's a 1-year-old aged wine out inside Chianti Classico, it can't. It's just called Chianti Classico. Reservas are only for Chianti Classico wines. So if a wine is aged for 2 years and it's in the Chianti Classico region, it becomes a Reserva wine. And that's, for instance, Gabbiano, this wine. And you'll see it's got a rooster on it and it's got the Chianti Classico Reserva. That means it's been aged in 2 years. And we talk about aging. The most important thing to note about Chianti wines in terms of aging is that they don't necessarily have to be aged in oak. They just have to be aged. Generally speaking, a lot of them will be at the higher level aged in oak. At the top of the Chianti food chain is Gran Selezione wines. And I actually personally love drinking Gran Selezione wines. And I'm glad they did this classification because in general, in the past, I didn't enjoy Chianti wines because they were so tannic. I enjoyed kind of mellowed or aged Chianti, but I found them just too bold. Of course, if I was eating really heavy tomato-based foods, it would be fine because the acidity of the tomato or the sauce would kind of interact and soften the tannins, alcohol content, and boldness of the wine. So Gran Selezione are basically, they must be from the Chianti Classico region. They are aged 30 months a minimum. So again, there is no requirement that they're aged in oak, but most of them are. And they must pass a board or quality test by the Chianti Classico Consortium. So for those people who say, well, that's, all this is just, it doesn't matter, like there's a single vineyard or these classifications doesn't matter. In some regions, that's correct, but not in Chianti. I think in Chianti, generally speaking, your Gran Selezione wines are going to be better because they're aged longer. And the whole idea about the Chianti or the Sangiovese grape is it does need time. It does need aging. And plus, there's at least a quality test here. So to me, they are the top-end wines. They do need a little bit more time compared to, let's say, an Annata wines. I need about normally 5 to 8 years before I'll drink it. But remember, they've been aged longer before release. So that's probably one thing that helps them soften quicker. And also, that's probably why they're higher priced, because if you can think about it, a Annata wine that only has to age 6 months before they release it, compared to a Gran Selezione wine where someone has to wait another 2 years. So there's 2 years of holding cost of that winery to before they can release the wine. So if anyone thinks wineries are kind of trick you by putting their bad stuff into Gran Selezione, that's crazy, because why would I want to do that? I would only put my top wines or top grapes into this wine because I'm not going to wait another 24 months if I could sell it right away. And so it is a quality thing from my perspective. But they haven't stopped there. The Chianti Classico Consortium have now set rules that are going to take effect in 2027 for Grand Selezione wines. I think they need to give them a little bit of time. One of the rules is that they will now be required to have at least 90% Sangiovese in their blend. Now, most wines, most of the top-end wines already have that, met that, but they're giving some time. The minimum right now is 80% for, so any Chianti wine has to have at least 80% Sangiovese grapes. And then the second thing they're doing is they're going to create these UGAs, which are even more specified. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it in Italian, but it's kind of additional geographical units, which have some special subzones, which is this whole idea of focusing where the grapes come from so that you can taste the terroir or have distinctiveness in the grapes. I think these are all great things. And they think that only about 8 or 9% of Chianti wines will be able to meet this Grand Selezione criteria. But if you look at the growth of Chianti wines, it's all at the higher end wines. It's all in Reserva and Grand Selezione. So I think they account for, even though they account for maybe Grand Selezione accounts for, let's say, 10% of the actual wines coming with Chianti, they probably account for 20 something or 30% of the actual income coming out of there. So it's a good thing for Chianti region. They're trying to reinvent themselves in terms of what they were in the 1700s. They were always a quality place, and now somehow they got this idea or this notion that they're, value. And now they want to say, well, we're value, but we're also good quality. So the last part of this video, I'm just going to go through a couple of wines. I mean, I don't drink a lot of Chianti, but there are some producers that I've really loved. One is Gabbiano. So I've done a review of the Gabbiano. I'll put it at the end of this video. Again, I have some bottles that I kind of age. Very good value producer. They have another one that's out right now, which is their Cavalier d'Or. But again, when I recommend value wines, I like to recommend people that specialize in value wines, right? Just like when I recommend high-end wines, I like to see producers that actually specialize in high-end wines. That's what you really want to do. And so Gabbiano is a value wine producer. It's a Reserva, so it's not as heavy, not as tannic as just the Annata wines, but not the best label in the world, but it is a value wine. One wine that I've always been quite high on, and I've done a review of, and I probably will do another review of some more vintages, is Castella di Ama. And I love this winery. It's from the San Lorenzo region. They were, I think the owner was the president of the Consortium, so he's really into quality. I think they were one of the first to do Grand Selezione wines. They produce some spectacular wines, and it's a spectacular story. So please check out my video on that. And the last one I have in my cellar is Volpaia, and I've drunk this many times. This is their Cold Sassala wine, 2015. That's a great vintage. So the vintages that I kind of focus on in Chianti is 15 and 16. I'll have in the comment section the more recent vintages. I think 19 is a good vintage also, but I'll have to kind of check in my comment section. I don't buy new Chianti very much right now because it's not really an area of interest this year for me. So I keep a couple of bottles around. Volpaia is another producer that I really like in terms of the style of the wine. For all these wines, I'll probably age them a bit more before I drink them. Again, I like softer wines. But what Chianti brings to the table in terms of taste, first of all, it gives you good alcohol and good tan and good acidity, which is, I like brightness in terms of wines. It brings a kind of a plum and Italian herb, and it might sound trite, but I do like it with Italian food. And there's probably a reason why Italian wines go well with Italian food, because they've probably been producing this for many years. And Sangiovese, probably there's a reason why it goes well with Italian food. You know, pastas, again, anything with tomato sauce, pizza even. Pizza and Chianti is a great mix. Ossobuco, you know, veal, scallopini, those type of dishes go really, really well with Chianti in my opinion. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Until next time, happy drinking.